The concrete wall appeared overnight, choking the life from Sarah's beloved creek. What the HOA didn't know: that same creek fed directly into their million-dollar headquarters building. Now their improvement was about to become their worst nightmare, and Sarah held all the cards. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. The morning sun barely touched the horizon when Sarah Martinez stepped onto her back porch with her coffee. What she saw made her cup slip from her trembling hands, shattering on the wooden deck below. Where her beloved creek once flowed, the gentle stream that had sung lullabies through her windows for 15 years, now stood a wall of ugly gray concrete. The water that once danced over smooth stones was gone, replaced by cracked earth and dying fish gasping in puddles. "What have they done?" she whispered, her voice breaking. Sarah had inherited this property from her grandmother, along with the stories of how the creek had sustained their family for generations. Her grandmother used to say the creek was alive, that it chose its path for a reason. Now it looked like a grave. Her neighbor, Mrs. Chin, appeared at the fence line, her face etched with the same shock and anger. "They came at dawn," she said, her voice shaking. "Trucks full of cement. They said it was HOA business." Sarah's hands clenched into fists. The Willowbrook Homeowners Association had been a thorn in everyone's side for years, but this was different. This was war. The HOA office sat like a fortress at the entrance of their neighborhood, a gleaming glass building that cost more than most people's homes. Sarah stormed through the automatic doors, her muddy boots leaving tracks on the pristine marble floor. "I want to speak to whoever authorized the destruction of my creek," she announced to the startled receptionist. Minutes later, she stood face to face with Richard Blackwood, the HOA president. He was exactly what she expected: a man in an expensive suit who looked like he'd never worked a day with his hands. His cold blue eyes showed no remorse. "Ms. Martinez," he said with a smile that never reached his eyes, "the creek was a liability. Mosquitoes, flooding risks, property value concerns. We're improving the neighborhood." "That creek has flowed for hundreds of years," Sarah shot back. "You had no right." "Actually, we had every right. According to the environmental assessment we commissioned, the water was stagnant and unhealthy. We're protecting residents from potential health hazards." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. Environmental assessment? That creek was crystal clear. My family has been drinking from it for generations. Blackwood's assistant, a thin woman with sharp features, slid a folder across the desk. "Here's the documentation. Everything was done legally and for the community's benefit." Sarah flipped through pages of technical jargon and official stamps. Her eyes caught something that made her blood run cold. The water testing had been done in the wrong location, nearly a mile away from her creek. "This isn't even my creek," she said, her voice deadly quiet. "Water is water," Blackwood shrugged. "The decision is final. Good day, Ms. Martinez." That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She sat by her bedroom window, staring at the concrete wall that had murdered her creek. But as she watched, something strange caught her eye. In the moonlight, she could see a thin trickle of water seeping around the edges of the concrete barrier. The creek was trying to find its way. Over the next few days, Sarah began her investigation. She visited the county courthouse, pulled permits, traced ownership records. What she discovered made her heart race with possibilities. The creek didn't just flow through her property, it was the primary water source for the entire area. And more importantly, it flowed directly under the HOA headquarters before reaching her land. But there was more. The HOA building had been constructed with special permits that required maintaining the natural water flow. By blocking her creek, they had violated their own building permits. Sarah's hands shook as she read the fine print. The consequences for permit violations were severe: potential demolition of structures built in violation of environmental protection laws. Sarah knew she couldn't fight this battle alone. She started with Mrs. Chin, who had always been a friend. Then she reached out to other neighbors who had been bullied by the HOA over the years. There was Miguel Santos, whose vegetable garden had been deemed unsightly and forced to be removed. The young couple, David and Lisa Park, who had been fined repeatedly for their children's chalk drawings on their own driveway. Elderly Mr. Peterson, whose American flag had been declared too large for community standards. One by one, they gathered in Sarah's living room, sharing their stories of HOA tyranny. But it was Mrs. Chin who provided the most crucial information. "My husband works in city planning," she said quietly. "He told me something interesting about the HOA building. They've been having foundation problems, cracks appearing in the basement walls. The construction company has been out there 3 times this month." Sarah's mind raced. Foundation problems? Since when? Since about a week after they blocked your creek. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The creek hadn't just been decoration, it had been providing essential drainage for the entire area. Without it, water was building up underground, destabilizing everything built above it. Sarah spent the next week researching everything she could about water rights, environmental law, and construction permits. She discovered that her grandmother's property deed included ancient water rights that predated the HOA by decades. But more importantly, she learned about something called natural consequence liability. If someone altered a natural water source and it caused damage to other properties, they could be held responsible for all resulting costs. The plan formed in her mind like the creek itself: natural, inevitable, and unstoppable. She would document everything. Every crack in the HOA building, every permit violation, every piece of evidence that showed the creek blockage was causing structural damage. Then she would present it all at once, in a way that would make the biggest impact possible. But first, she needed to make them feel what she felt: the helplessness of watching something precious being destroyed. Sarah's opportunity came sooner than expected. The HOA was hosting their annual community meeting, where they would present their improvements to the neighborhood and ask for increased dues to fund more projects. She arrived early, carrying a briefcase full of documents and a laptop loaded with photographs. As residents filed into the community center, she handed each one a folder titled, "The True Cost of Creek Destruction." Inside were before and after photos of the creek, documentation of the permit violations, and most damaging of all, recent photographs of the cracks appearing in the HOA headquarters building. When Blackwood called the meeting to order, his confident smile faltered as he saw the folders in every resident's hands. But he pressed on, launching into his prepared speech about property values and community standards. "Our recent drainage improvements have eliminated a major source of mosquitoes and potential flooding," he announced, clicking to a slide showing the concrete barrier. Sarah stood up. "Mr. Blackwood, could you explain why your drainage improvements have caused structural damage to your own building?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Blackwood's face flushed red. "I don't know what you're talking about." Sarah opened her laptop and projected a photo onto the wall, a clear image of a massive crack running down the side of the HOA building. "This crack appeared 2 weeks after you blocked the creek. The creek that, according to county records, provides the primary drainage for this entire area." The murmurs turned into angry voices. Residents began flipping through their folders, seeing the evidence with their own eyes. "Furthermore," Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger, "the environmental assessment you used to justify this destruction was conducted on the wrong waterway. You destroyed a healthy creek based on tests from a polluted stream nearly a mile away." Blackwood's assistant whispered urgently in his ear. He looked like a man watching his world crumble. "The meeting is adjourned," he announced, but nobody moved. The residents had questions and they wanted answers. Over the following weeks, Sarah's campaign gained momentum. She had awakened something in the community, a shared anger at years of HOA overreach and tyranny. The local newspaper picked up the story. "HOA destroys historic creek, damages own building," read the headline. The article featured interviews with longtime residents who shared stories of the creek's importance to the community's history and ecosystem. Environmental groups took notice. The state's Department of Natural Resources announced an investigation into potential violations of the Clean Water Act. The county building inspector scheduled an emergency assessment of the HOA headquarters. But Blackwood wasn't going down without a fight. He hired lawyers, threatened lawsuits, and began a campaign of intimidation against Sarah and her allies. Suddenly, every property in the neighborhood was being inspected for violations. Fines were issued for the smallest infractions: a mailbox 6 inches too close to the street, a rosebush that extended beyond property lines by mere inches. Sarah received a thick envelope from the HOA legal department, threatening her with lawsuits for defamation and interference with community business. The legal fees alone could bankrupt her. But Sarah had learned something important from her grandmother's stories about the creek. Sometimes the gentlest pressure, applied consistently over time, could move mountains. As summer progressed, the consequences of blocking the creek became impossible to ignore. The concrete barrier that was supposed to solve drainage problems had created a disaster. Without the creek's natural flow, groundwater began pooling in unexpected places. Basements flooded throughout the neighborhood. The community park, built on what was once the creek's floodplain, became a swamp after every rainfall. But nowhere were the effects more dramatic than at the HOA headquarters itself. The building that once symbolized authority and control was literally falling apart. Cracks appeared in the foundation walls. The parking lot developed sinkholes. The pristine landscaping wilted and died as the natural water table shifted. Sarah documented everything. She walked the neighborhood with her camera, photographing each new crack, each flooded basement, each dead tree. Her evidence folder grew thicker by the day. The insurance companies took notice too. Several residents received notices that their flood insurance premiums would be increasing dramatically due to the altered drainage patterns in the area. Property values, which Blackwood had claimed to be protecting, began to plummet. Sarah's breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Maria Santos, Miguel's daughter, was a college student studying environmental engineering. She had been following the creek situation as a case study for her classes. "Sarah," she said excitedly, appearing at the front door with her laptop, "you need to see this." Maria had used sophisticated modeling software to trace the underground water flow in their area. The results were stunning. The creek wasn't just providing drainage, it was the keystone of the entire area's water system. Its flow prevented flooding, maintained the water table, and provided natural filtration for groundwater. "Look at this," Maria pointed to her screen. "The HOA building was constructed directly over a natural spring that feeds into your creek. When they blocked the creek, they essentially created an underground lake beneath their own foundation." Sarah stared at the model, watching the digital water flow that showed exactly what was happening beneath their feet. How long before the building becomes uninhabitable? Based on the rate of structural damage? Maybe 6 months. Less if we get a heavy rainy season. Armed with Maria's research and months of documentation, Sarah requested one final meeting with the HOA board. This time she wasn't asking, she was telling. She arrived at the HOA office with a team, Maria with her engineering analysis, a lawyer who specialized in environmental law, a representative from the state environmental agency, and a structural engineer who had volunteered to assess the building damage. Blackwood looked haggard. The stress of the mounting legal challenges and building problems had taken their toll. His expensive suit couldn't hide the dark circles under his eyes or the nervous tic that had developed in his left eyelid. "Ms. Martinez," he began, but Sarah cut him off. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm here to make you an offer. You have 72 hours to remove the concrete barrier and restore the creek to its natural flow. In exchange, I'll recommend to the affected residents that they accept the HOA's payment for damages to their properties and agree not to pursue further legal action." Blackwood's face turned purple. "You can't dictate terms to us. We have legal authority." "Your legal authority ended the moment you violated federal environmental protection laws," the state representative interrupted. "Our investigation has confirmed multiple violations. The fines alone will exceed $2 million. The structural engineer stepped forward with his report. "Mr. Blackwood, I've completed my assessment of this building. Due to the altered water flow and resulting foundation damage, I'm required to recommend immediate evacuation. This structure should not be occupied until major repairs are completed." Sarah watched Blackwood's face as the reality sank in. His fortress was crumbling literally and figuratively. "If you remove the barrier within 72 hours, Sarah continued, "the residents have agreed to accept a settlement of $500,000 for property damages and the costs of removing the concrete. If you refuse, we'll pursue full legal action. The lawyers estimate your total liability at over $10 million. Blackwood tried to stall to find another way out, but time was running out faster than water from a broken dam. The building inspector condemned the HOA headquarters 2 days after Sarah's ultimatum. Blackwood and his staff were forced to relocate to a rented trailer in the community center parking lot. The sight of the HOA president conducting business from a trailer while his $1 million headquarters sat empty behind yellow caution tape was sweeter than any revenge Sarah could have imagined. But the final blow came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Chen's husband called Sarah with news that made her heart race. "The city council is meeting tonight," he said. "They're voting on a resolution to designate your creek as a protected waterway. It would make it illegal for anyone to alter its flow in the future." That evening, Sarah sat in the packed city council chambers as speaker after speaker testified about the creek's importance. Environmental scientists spoke about its role in the ecosystem. Historians talked about its cultural significance to the community. Children read poems they had written about the stream that had been part of their childhood adventures. When the vote was called, it was unanimous. The creek would be protected forever. The concrete removal began at sunrise on the third day after Sarah's ultimatum. She stood with her neighbors, watching as hydraulic hammers broke apart the gray barrier that had choked their creek. The first trickle of water appeared around noon. By evening, the creek was flowing again, carrying away months of accumulated debris and beginning to carve its ancient path through the earth. Within a week, the water ran clear again. Fish returned from downstream pools where they had waited out the drought. Birds came back to drink and bathe in the shallows. Children once again played along the banks, just as Sarah had done with her grandmother decades before. The HOA headquarters, meanwhile, remained empty. The cost of repairing the foundation damage was estimated at over $3 million, more than the building was worth. Eventually, the structure was demolished, and the land was donated to the city for a new community park. Blackwood resigned in disgrace and moved away from the neighborhood. The new HOA board, elected from among the residents who had fought against the creek destruction, focused on genuine community improvements rather than petty power plays. 2 years later, Sarah sat on her back porch with her morning coffee, listening to the familiar song of water over stones. The creek ran stronger than ever, protected by law and cherished by the community. Mrs. Chin had installed a small bench beside the stream where neighborhood children could sit and watch the water flow. Miguel's new garden flourished in the rich soil near the creek bank. The Park family's children had grown up to become fierce advocates for environmental protection, inspired by the battle they had witnessed. Sarah opened her laptop and began typing a letter to her granddaughter, who was studying environmental law at college. "My dear Emma, you asked me what I learned from our fight to save the creek. I learned that sometimes the most powerful force is not the one that shouts the loudest or builds the highest walls. Sometimes it's the steady, patient pressure of truth, applied consistently over time. Water always finds its way. It may be blocked temporarily, but it never stops trying to flow where it belongs. Justice is like that too. It may be delayed, but it cannot be permanently denied." The men who thought they could control nature with concrete learned that some things are bigger than their ambitions. They discovered that when you try to stop something that has flowed freely for centuries, the consequences reach far beyond what you can imagine. Your great-great-grandmother used to say that the creek chose its path for a reason. She was right. It chose to flow through our community to teach us about persistence, about working together, and about the power of standing up for what's right. The creek still sings its lullabies through my window at night. But now it sings songs of victory too, songs about ordinary people who refused to let bullies destroy what they loved. Songs about how water, like justice, always finds a way. Come visit soon, my dear. I want you to sit by the creek and hear its stories for yourself. You're going to love what it has to tell you about never giving up. Sarah sealed the letter and walked down to the creek's edge. She knelt by the clear water and whispered a prayer of gratitude to her grandmother, to the creek itself, and to the community that had stood together when it mattered most. The water sparkled in the morning sun, flowing freely toward whatever challenges lay downstream, carrying with it the eternal promise that truth, like water, always finds its way home.